Tim Cain. The guy needs no introduction. He had a video that just popped up on my YouTube feed. I think it just got published a few minutes ago called Troika and Kickstarter What If? I loved the Troika D&D game, Temple of Elemental Evil. And if you've never played it, it was a hot, buggy, janky mess when it came out. But there have been, things done to it over the years to make it more stable. And if you can find it, if you can play it, I recommend it. Just don't worry about, it is an older game, so it's going to look and feel like an older game. But if you can get past that as a modern gamer and you've never played it, you really should. It was an amazing experience, which for various reasons just didn't ultimately get the recognition that it probably should have gotten, but it was nevertheless a very deep, rich game that he was a huge part of. So, this video is in relation to someone asking him a question. I haven't watched the full video. I've just watched the quick introduction. Was like, okay, cool. So, we're gonna sink our teeth into this and listen to him as he talks about the answer to what if. And I think the coolest part, just wait. Yeah, this is fun. This is a fun conversation. So here's Tim Cain on games, Troika and Kickstarter. What if?
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about Troika games and Kickstarter. No, Kickstarter did not exist when Troika was there, but someone asked a question on the channel, and I think it's been asked multiple times. It's also something I've thought about a lot. It's something I've actually discussed a little bit. I know I
that part I didn't catch because I didn't watch the full intro. Don't tease us like that. Don't tease us like that, Tim. That's not cool, man. Discussions have been had. I'm sure, though. I mean, that was a game. It was big enough to a certain amount of people that I think it could be a successful Kickstarter.
I had this discussion with Leonard. I talked about it with a couple other designers at Obsidian when I was there. But let's dive into it. NU4ED, I don't know how to pronounce that, asks, if Kickstarter had been a thing while Troika was alive, would you have tried to crowdfund? And if yes, what? So I will give you the answers as briefly as I can, and then I'll dive into it. Yes, and Arcanum 2.
Ho, 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 ho. Yes, Arcanum 2. Oh,
So, yes, if crowdfunding had existed, Troika definitely would have gone that path. Troika was a very small company. When we made Arcanum, we were 14 people.
Yeah, I thought it was 13, so 14, yeah.
Because of that, we were very efficient. People wore lots of different hats, which you don't see these days. We had people doing programming who...
I would say that might not necessarily be the case in the space that he was in. I will say there are a lot of indie teams. I can say this as someone who's in the indie game dev scene, having gone to a few game conferences and just being in the indie MMORPG space for 8 years, and then the tabletop and point and click realm for the last 3 years. There are a lot of teams where people wear multiple hats. It's I would say that the industry stuff isn't quite that way because everyone has clearly defined roles and they're paid for a very specific task. But on the indie scale of things, my experience has been, even in recent years, that it's still very much we're all wearing multiple hats. I remember on the MMO, for example, I was lead writer, art lead, did in charge of the music for like the first 6 years. All the marketing, all the newsletters, all the video production, so video editing, all the banking, all the conversations, all the emails, all the interviews, like everything. Like I was, and my brother was doing the same thing. I was also doing world building in VFX. My brother was doing world building, VFX, asset creation, dungeon creation, design documents with me, like, and then working on the most recent one we've done. We've definitely, you're all pulling your weight.
We were also doing design. We had designers who were doing art. We had artists who were doing scripting.
Yep.
We had people doing business work.
Yep.
Everything from ordering supplies to interacting with the publisher to handling the office, the landlord, and handling things around the office.
I mean,
we did all of that. Plus, we made a game. So Troika was the perfect game to handle the efficiency that you need for a Kickstarter budget. When people say, well, you could raise millions of dollars. Yeah, but it costs millions of dollars to make a game.
Yes.
And you better get it right because there's no going back to that well. Unlike a publisher, where if you run out of money and you're like, hey, I just need another milestone to finish, you can't do that with Kickstarter. But I think Troika was small enough that had we gotten a budget like that and made for the budget, and we had learned, I think with Fallout and Arcanum, we had learned better about staying in a budget. I know Bloodlines kind of shows that isn't true, but we stayed within the budget for Temple and we gave more than what was asked for and more than what we probably should. But anyway, wouldn't have gone with Bloodlines. I wouldn't have gone with Temple. What I would have made is Arcanum 2.
That's very interesting to hear because I would have assumed another, temple, like another D&D. But this is very interesting to hear. Arcanum 2.
I've already talked about what I want for a sequel for that. I'll link it below.
Okay.
But
I need to go watch that.
That Journey to the Center of Arcanum, maybe we would have done that. If it was a Kickstarter game, maybe we wouldn't. I mean, we would have certainly asked what people would want. Did you want another game using the same engine? Would you want us to go first person because Source was then a big thing and it was available, and the person who had signed us for Sierra now worked over at Valve. So there's a bunch of things that we could have done there. But one of the reasons I pick Arcanum for a sequel is we had way more stories to tell. Way more. We barely scratched the surface of a fantasy world undergoing an industrial revolution.
I remember it being, I haven't played it in a very long time. I remember that being like a steampunk type magic game. I would have to go back and look at it. It's been a long time. I mean, a long time. That was a Sierra game. That was like what, late 80s? I don't remember when Arcanum came out.
Part of the reason we didn't tell those stories is you can add side content to a game, and we added a lot of side content to Arcanum. But eventually you have to tell the story you set out to tell.
Yes.
Which was, who was that mysterious gnome in the blimp crash, and why is this leading to a dangerous villain returning to the world of Arcanum? But we still had way more stories to tell. I wanted to talk about different elven clans besides the ones you met, different dwarven clans. Wanted to dive way more into what was going on with orcs in various places, because we talk about orcs in cities. What about orcs that lived out in the wilderness? What about ogres? What about that whole half ogre storyline? Now that's.
By the way, it's available on GOG, and I haven't played this in such a very, very long time. I have almost next to no recollections of Arcanum. I may have to. We may have to rectify that. We may have to just. I'm gonna shut up and keep playing the video here.
It's a good example, though, of why if we go Kickstarter, that would probably be better, because it was hard enough telling some of our stories back then without being censored. In fact, about that time, putting in anything that was even vaguely homosexual was censored.
Yeah.
But these days, I doubt if we'd be able to tell many of the stories from Arcanum in a game, because people would be like, no, you don't want to talk about that. Or half the reason we created Arcanum, not half, but a big chunk of Arcanum was, here are all these different races, real races, not, like we have in our world. But here are people who are literally different genetic humanoids. We had gnomes, we had orcs, we had elves, we had dwarves and humans. And there was a bunch of racist stuff going on, and we addressed it. We tried to address what would happen. Things that seemed okay in a fantasy world, but that doesn't fly in a modern industrialized world.
So this is an interesting thing, because one of the I would say, I don't play the Dark Path in Rogue Trader, but one of the things I know that Rogue Trader has drawn praise for is the depth of its it's not the reputation system, it's, I forget what it's called, but it's like whether you choose to be a good guy or a bad guy, and you can go like super dark, like not heretical, but like you can be in the market and see a bunch of slaves in chains and in cages because you're on a planet where slavery is still acceptable because you're on the fringes, and you can choose to set the slaves free, or you can choose to join in and like throw rocks at them and crack the whip and and sentence them to death. I mean, there are some games that are willing to go into the dark side of what true racism looks like, because I love the fact that he just addressed that, not like what we have here, which is just kind of made up, because we're all the human race, if that makes sense. Whereas he's talking about, looking at like what Tolkien created with actual racial differences. Like there's a genetic difference, and it's really cool to see it explored and not shy away from the things that make good storytelling, which is there needs to be some sort of really evil, nasty thing going on. Show the depth of evil so that you can have good guys overcoming evil, because that's what ultimately we all want to play.
Those were issues that were facing the world of Arcanum, and we wanted to tell stories about that because it reflects stories in the real world. But people don't want that now. People want you to pretend like nothing's bad, nothing's going on. The whole there's a problem here, but let's not talk about it. If we don't talk about it, it won't be a problem, or it will go away. And that's not what we were trying to do in Arcanum. We were trying to tell a lot of different stories, and there was so many different stories that if it was something you weren't interested in, you didn't have to follow that gnome half ogre plot. You didn't have to follow that. You didn't have to dive too deep on what was happening to dwarf clans. You didn't have to dive too deep on dark elves, what was going on with those clans. But those are things I would love to have told if we'd had a Kickstarter. I think, too, Kickstarter provided a better communication channel between the fans, who are now literally your stakeholders. They're paying you to do this, and the developer. So doing an early beta and getting feedback on it, way easier with a Kickstarter, especially because you can get feedback from people who paid. In fact, that's something that's going on this channel. There's so much feedback on this channel. I'm still reading all the comments, but it takes a lot of time just to do that.
Dude, I can't imagine, because I'm a small YouTuber, right? I got 26,000 followers, and it's just waves. And when I have something that's peaking, we get hundreds of comments in a day, right? And I do try to answer everything, but there's definitely peaks. And then there's sometimes when you're in the content gap and you're in between new releases and popular videos, you might have a day goes by where maybe you only have to answer 50 comments, right? I cannot imagine being somebody with 30 years of game development experience, whatever, and ahead of Fallout and Arcanum and Temple and all these cool games that he has worked on, Pillars of Eternity, like that level of fame within the gaming industry. I can't imagine what his inbox looks like, but it does take a lot of time sometimes.
Trying to answer them and then trying to make videos based on them. I've already got a month of videos in the queue.
Yep.
It's really hard to do. One of the things that YouTube has suggested several times is that I throw memberships onto the channel where people pay something like $1.99, and then they have a little icon next to their name, but they give me tools to let me prioritize. Those are the comments I want to read first. So it would provide a way of me getting feedback from people who are a little more vested in this channel than people who are just doing drive-bys. They saw the video, they watched part of it, they understood a quarter of it, and then they leave a comment, and I'm like sitting there trying to understand.
Trolls, bro.
A joke? Are they being sarcastic?
No, it's a troll.
Did they really mean it? Did they really understand what I was trying to say? The wonderful thing about Kickstarter is you can put forums that only people who donate can get into.
Yeah, it's filtered.
Maybe you can even kick it up and saying you have to donate a significant amount before you can get into this forum. You can give the beta to everybody, but you can make a feedback for the people who have a greater stake in the game.
Yes.
And these are people who
they're good
like
bad sides
if
to
you're
that.
paying money for something, you care about how good it is. So we get better feedback. I think right there that would be a nice self-selection filter for getting good feedback from people.
It's not incorrect, but I can also say from having higher level backers with the MMO project, there is a threshold where sometimes your biggest backers will become your biggest. They will become the most angry if you do something that they don't like. And so if you're getting let's say there's 10 people in a room, 9 people want to go one way and one person wants to go the other way. Well, the 9 people are going to win the vote. That one person is going to get upset, and if they're not an adult, they will then proceed to make waves, and that could be really frustrating when they turn like that because of something that the majority agreed needs to move on and change, and this one person remains. It could be one, it could be 10, it could be 50, but they're you're not going to be able to please everyone. So there is, that can happen as well.
But I had
What I'm getting at is I feel that people who have invested a significant amount of money, and by significant, I would say, well, it just depends on the person, but depends on everybody's financial needs. But let's say a few $1,000s, you know, uh, they tend to, and maybe rightfully so because they've invested more, so they feel like they have more of a stake in things. But they can definitely become the most toxic people in your community if you don't, please every single part, and it's an impossibility. So that I feel like the angriest people tend to be the ones who have turned and gone from being your highest level supporters to being like, you didn't patch this one thing that I needed, and everybody else is like, because it didn't need to be. Yes, it did. You can't please everyone.
had another reason, by the way, a very personal reason for why I'd rather do Arcanum than Temple or Bloodlines.
Quick commercial break, everyone, to celebrate and give thanks to all of these amazing people who keep me on the air full time. Really appreciate the support. All you got to do is join as a member. You get access to private videos. You can also do super thanks on any upload or super chats and stickers on any live stream or premiere you see. And beyond that, don't forget we're multi-streaming over on Twitch now, so you can support over there as well. Thanks so much to everybody. Let's get back to the video at hand.
If we had ever kickstarted a Troika game, and that's because I really liked working on Arcanum, especially having coming from Fallout, where there was a lot of pressures that people on the other team didn't. People on the team didn't have to experience, but I did. Because interestingly, when I talked to Leonard liked Fallout, working on Fallout better than Arcanum. We're not talking about the end product. We're talking about the actual development
The
process.
working process.
He says he liked Fallout better than Arcanum. And I think it's because he didn't deal with a lot of the stuff having to do with Fallout. I did. I was the one that was dealing with all the production issues
Yeah, so he got
and
the
deadlines and
so
arguments that
Leonard
were
got
coming in
the
from above.
the the cozy
He didn't have
version.
to deal with any of that, but he did on Arcanum. And so suddenly he's like, I don't like the
Uh,
Arcanum process very much.
I
To
don't like the
me,
business side of
Arcanum was a
things.
lot less pressure.
Dude, I can say this having gone through multiple businesses, and I've built quite a few businesses and also consulted on probably are in the ballpark of 50 brands over the years. Um, you see this a lot, right? Everyone wants to be like, everyone's happy to coast, right? But the moment they have to actually be a business owner and start dealing with the business side of things, they quickly realize that you don't get sick days, you don't get time off, you don't get to just go home when you feel bad, you don't get to go home when you're sick. Like, unless there's a medical emergency that puts you in the hospital, or like an immediate family member, like your spouse, has something happens, like, you don't get to take time off, you don't get to step away. Like, there are legal repercussions. Like, you are the head of something that has a lot of working parts. And so if the company fails to deliver, you know, the investors or the publisher doesn't give you the milestone payment, and then suddenly the 15 people working beneath you don't get paid, like, there's a lot of responsibility that goes on with being like the head of production and answering the mail, making sure the rent is paid on the building, and making sure that you've got your internet paid. And like he was talking about earlier, when you're wearing many hats, you're doing the business side of things as well as the creative side of things, which is what, with early Stormhaven Studios, so like 7.5, almost 8 years, I did CEO and CMO and creative director. So I was doing all of those things, while also fundraising and all the other craziness that we were doing. This is it's not everyone is cut out for that, and some people quickly find that they don't want to be business owners. They just want to they just want to draw pictures, or they just want to make music, or they just want to build worlds or paint, or they don't want to do the business side of things. Not everyone's cut out for that. Um, it's Once you're a business owner, there's a certain level of commitment that pops in, and that's not fun for everybody. It's not something that everyone wants to do.
It was, it felt calmer. It felt like more of our ideas were going into the game with less discussion with higher up people. I like that. I would love to do that again. A Kickstarter, if Kickstarter had existed back at Troika, we certainly would have
He's testing the waters
Kickstarted
too right now.
Arcanum
Nudge,
2.
nudge, wink, wink.
And maybe it would have been Journey to the Center of Arcanum.
Is there enough
Maybe it
interest
would
for
have
me to do a
been
Kickstarter?
an isometric game set on a different continent or a different story told on that continent we had, since we already had established a lot of NPCs and a lot of cool areas. Couldn't say. I mean, yeah, Kickstarter didn't happen until uh,
Like 10 years later.
over 10 years after
Yeah.
um, Arcanum. Arcanum shipped in 2001. I think we kickstarted in 2012. So it
For
seems
Pillars?
like it's a bigger
Something like that,
gap,
yeah.
but it's not that big. But basically, Kickstarter came 10 years too late for Troika. Anyway, new for Ed. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm entertained by that. I think
People who are a little more-
that there's a lot of interesting stuff in here in terms of the development, like the creative and business stuff. I love the fact that he touched on the whole business management of being in production and needing to worry about the rent and internet payments and server payments and make sure everybody gets paid, make sure that the engine room is stocked, that you get snacks, that the lights are on. Like there's when everybody's wearing multiple hats, it's a lot of work. Arcane was a good game. I would love to see him do something else. I know right now he's only working as on a consulting basis for Obsidian. I believe that's the public information. I don't know if there's something else going on there, but I would happily play another Tim Cain game. So please, sir, Kickstarter something. I'll throw money at it. Like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, everybody. I'll be back later on with more of Tim Cain. I guarantee it. I'm really liking his channel. I've done a couple reaction videos already to some of his stuff, so hopefully you've enjoyed those. Along with liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell icon, don't forget every day we stream here and on Twitch. There's a Discord. I do a lot of different things, including movies and films, so check those out. I'm also an author. My latest fantasy novel is down below, and there's a Patreon page. See you guys next time. Stay safe and happy gaming.